As the Sharks continue their rebuild, what lessons can we learn from the Sabres who are going through the longest playoff drought in NHL history?
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, caretaker at the Reef, also the co-host of Western Conference Tuesdays on the Locked On NHL channel. I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen, probably part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. If you want to be an everyday, all you have to do is just follow wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch this on YouTube as well. And today we're joined by Joe from Locked On Sabres, where we talk about when rebuilds go wrong. And as Sharks fans, right, we're very excited about the direction of the rebuild, and we have belief that it's going to, the Tilo's future, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens when they don't go well? So I wanted to get Joe's opinion on kind of some of the lessons that he's learned as these Sabres they've been 13 years since their last playoff appearance, and kind of, lessons and a little bit of guidance, what to root for, et cetera, et cetera. So before we get to all that, do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And now we bring in Joe from Locked On Sabres. How's it going, buddy?
What's up, JD? How you doing?
Not too bad. I know you and I are both getting excited for football season here for different reasons, but we'll leave that for a conversation for another day. So wanted to, as most fan bases, when you start a rebuild, you're very excited about it. But what happens when the rebuild doesn't go the way you want it to? And I thought there's no better man than the guy who's currently in the longest NHL playoff drought, with Joe, who covers the Sabres. So let's start with, how did the Sabres kind of get to this point of being this team that is always stuck in this perpetual rebuild?
Well, there's a bunch of different reasons and different men involved in these decisions, and it just for context, like it's been so long. I was like, different phase of life. I am now married. I've got a house. We're thinking about at some point, I'm sure, having kids. And the last time I watched a Sabre playoff game, I was doing my math homework. That's not an exaggeration. I was literally in high school. So it's been a very, very long time. I wasn't even driving yet the last time they were in the playoffs. It's the longest playoff drought in NHL history. And it's deserved because they've had a lot of bad decision-making, which is really, that's all it takes. You just have a run of a couple of different general managers in a row, coaches in a row, poor decision makers, and they've proven you can even have top talented players that have all left and won elsewhere and proven they weren't the big problem, and organizational dysfunction can still drag you down. So, I mean, it does kind of line up with when owner Terry Pegula got here. Like, it's hard to ignore the coincidence that he shows up in April of 2011. They make the playoffs that season, so it's already almost over. Like, there's a month left in the regular season when he takes over. And then every season since, they've missed. And they've really only come close the one time. 2 years ago, they missed by 1 point. Otherwise, they've never been within double digits. So how did we get here? It's long, it's complicated. I tend to think, though, the number one reason is they've had multiple people calling the shots that were poor talent evaluators, that didn't know how to find the good talent, didn't know how to draft, didn't know how to make the right trades.
Okay, so poor decision-making, I think that's usually the route to most bad rebuilds, or rebuilds that take way too long. And you can kind of see the cracks in other franchises. You look at Ottawa, who's been a team that's had a lot of turnover, and they've also, kind of not as long, but they've been in this, like, when are they going to start competing? Kind of the same thing with Anaheim, right? They've had a general manager change. Also, it feels like the most eternal rebuild with the same core group of guys. So Well, we'll talk about the draft and other stuff here in a little bit, but you mentioned like, okay, the general manager and the ownership and all that stuff. Is there like one moment where you kind of look back and it's like, if we had done this differently, we're probably looking at a team that's at least competing?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think really they had at one point, and this is no secret, it's actually kind of become funny. Even here, like it's not even torture. It's almost hilarious that this team had a core group of Stanley Cup winners in Jack Eichel, Ryan O'Reilly, and Sam Reinhart. I mean, I could rattle off Evan Rodriguez was a role player on this team that just proved he can go be an important role player and a Stanley Cup winner in Florida. They had goaltenders, Linus Ullmark, that proved in Boston, I could be a Vezina winner in my best season. There are countless examples of guys like that. Really, if you rewind back to the end of that group, it's kind of the end of general manager Tim Murray's reign as the Sabres GM, that's Pagula's first hire. That's his first GM hire. He inherited Darcy Regier. He gave him a year or two and then moved off. Pat LaFontaine became his president, and then their first hire as GM together was Tim Murray. And Murray was all out. Let's be aggressive. Let me trade every pick and prospect that I've got, and let me just go get a bunch of talented players. And to his credit, he brought in a lot of talented players. He traded for O'Reilly. You can question the morality of tanking in 2015, but they knew there were two top players. And of course, everybody wanted McDavid, no doubt. And everybody recognized the difference, but they knew 100% chance at one of two top centers should they finish in last. He did that, and he did that on purpose. And listen, Jack Eichel is a great player. He's not McDavid, but he's a great player.
Yep.
He kind of built this core of super talented forwards that, were probably a little immature, but he just didn't surround them with the right pieces. And at the end, everyone knew what the problem was. They didn't have the right coach in place. And even more than that, they didn't have a blue line at all. I mean, they had one of the worst defense cores in hockey, and it sunk them night after night after night. And everybody knew. I think this is like the summer of 2016. The draft was here in Buffalo. And I remember standing outside at their draft party and thinking like, all right, either a trade or they've got a top 10 pick. And it was this loaded class. I'll still remember you had Mikhail Sergachev, you had Charlie McAvoy. There are others that I'm sure I'm forgetting, but those are the top two names that I remember. It's like, all right, this is a draft that you got a bunch of great young defensemen that many think could step right in the NHL or maybe take 1 year, or got to trade that pick and go get a top four defenseman, more so a top pair defenseman. And they left that night with a forward in Alex Nylander that was kind of a polarizing prospect in the first place, and two was just the literal last thing the Sabres needed in their organizational depth chart. And they left that draft, they left that offseason with pretty much the exact same defense core. And to me, that has always been the moment that the talented group that had it in them to win, that was the death certificate. That was signing the death certificate, because you had forwards that no one could get the puck up to them. And how are you supposed to win in a circumstance like that? So there are probably 5-10 other moments or places in the drought's history that a fan could point to and say, well, this is when we knew it was rock bottom. This is when we knew it was rock bottom. That summer will always be it for me, because especially since then, we've been proven that those players were good enough to win up front. They just didn't have the right support.
Now it seems like they've overcorrected and they've built this blue line with a lot of top end talent, and then now you're kind of like, I know the forward group's got some really nice pieces, but you don't have that one guy that's like legit 1C or 1C prospect, and it seems like they're kind of they built up the forward group and they didn't focus on the defense group. Then they built up the defense group, and now the forward group is still so. Yes, I understand how frustrating that. I can imagine how frustrating that is. So all right, guys, before we continue with Joe, we talk about, getting lucky and unlucky at the same time with the lottery and some lessons to take away from going through an extensive rebuild. Just need to take a quick break. It's summertime, which of course means baseball season. And if you want to get tickets to an MLB game, you need to check out Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Price on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. I love, of course, being able to see what your seat looks like. There's nothing worse than getting to an event and realizing, dude, my seats stink. So with that, you can have parent reviews, know exactly what your review is going to look like on their Game Time app. 2 taps, you can have tickets sent directly to your phone. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL, LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Speaking of the draft, right? And you have to get kind of lucky, right? And Sharks fans know we just went through a miserable season this last year, and you were rewarded with Macklin Celebrini, who's expected to be a 1C in the league. The Sabres have gotten lucky, right? You got Jack Eichel, who would probably be the first overall pick in most drafts, with not excluding McDavid. You got the first round pick where you got Owen Power. Like, you got kind of lucky with which is what you need in a rebuild. But is it just that, like we mentioned, the timing before of just not being lucky all at the same time?
They got lucky in spots. And like, if you it depends like what you isolate the time period to, you know what I mean? Like, if you go to 2018 and say, oh, they won the lottery that year and there was a franchise defenseman available in Rasmus Dahlin, like, oh, awesome, perfect, we'll take it. It kind of, that defense core thing, how it's flipped, it's kind of happened almost by accident. Like, they won the Dahlin lottery, then they won the Power lottery, and like, oh, we're starting our team with 2 franchise defensemen. And they did make a trade for Bo Byram last season, and they're hoping that he can continue to be a top 4 guy. He had some concussion problems in Colorado, so we'll see. But they've got high end talent. They kind of by circumstance got there. You could also argue they kind of got unlucky in a way, because that's kind of the vibe around here, is that yes, they got Eichel, and Eichel was great, and in a different universe, it worked out with him here, because he's obviously a tremendous player. But they're a team that's won multiple lotteries in a decade, where you've had Connor McDavid, you've had Austin Matthews, Nathan McKinnon, Jack Hughes. Like, you've had these elite number 1 centers, if I could kind of specify it to centers. Yeah, those lotteries they haven't won. And I think that history would be different had they won. If you had taken the 2 lotteries they won, and they've been in every lottery, and just instead of 2018 and 2021, it was 2015 and 2017, or it was 2016 and 2019. You know what I mean? Like, if you took 2 different lotteries, they'd probably be a juggernaut. But defensemen take longer. And I think that's why fan patience is being tested right now, because defensemen do take longer. They don't pop as much right away. Dahlin's an example that it took him 5 years really to become a Norris caliber defenseman. And Power, I think you might be waiting a couple more years too. So you got lucky, you got unlucky a little bit. And just to wrap on this, you mentioned like center group. They are putting, I think, all their chips in the Tage Thompson was what he was 2 years ago basket. And that's possible. He was injured a lot last year, wrist injury, back injury. He still scored 30 goals, but that's obviously not number 1 center caliber. You're going to need him to be the 47 goal, 47 assist player that he was 2 years ago. So I feel like fingers are crossed on that right now, because that's basically the only plan to have a top number 1 center.
You wonder, like, I mean, it's easy to look back now, but like, especially that 2021 draft where it was very murky, right? And there wasn't like, it was a lot of like, okay, Owen Power's pretty good, and Matty Beniers is good. You wonder if they could have a redo, if they go back and get Matty Beniers, who won the Calder. I know he had a step back last year when the Kraken took a step back last year, but still has the looks of to be like either, a solid 1C or like a really, really, really high end 2C. You wonder if they maybe go back and revisit that decision, kind of hindsight in 2020.
I wonder what they would say in an honest moment, like a true honest moment. If you ask them that question, if I ask them that question on the radio, I know what they would say. They're going to defend their guy. In a true honest moment, it might be close because Beniers is a very good player and center is a need of theirs for sure. As I mentioned, though, defense is just like, it's tough. The guy I use to compare to Power a lot is Victor Hedman, because Hedman, like, go look at his numbers and go look at the first couple years of his career. He was a top pick too. He wasn't first, but I think he was second or third. But it was rocky. Like, he was fine, but he wasn't superstar Victor Hedman like we've grown accustomed to. And why is that? Why did a guy like Hedman take a few years? Why is Power, who has good analytics, like, he's a good possession player, but why don't you really see it? Why do you watch the games and not really notice him? Even though defensemen, that can be okay. They're players that don't have a lot of flash to their game. And again, that's where the patience has to come in with a guy like an Owen Power, because you're going to look up Owen Power highlights and you're probably not going to find anything, because
the YouTube video is very short.
Yeah, right. Like, you don't have it. He doesn't score a lot of goals. He doesn't have a big booming slap shot. The things he does well, there are these little nuances within the game that I'm sure a hockey coach would have a great appreciation for in a film room. But just like me watching, I know I can't have the greatest appreciation for what Power's game is. And I do think when you're a player whose foundation is kind of like Hedman, I'm going to control. This is what he was in Michigan, Power. I'm going to control the game. Like, you are not going to get the puck off me. I'm going to quarterback this thing at 5-on-5. I am always going to make the right play. I'm going to be able to see the ice and know where the pass is supposed to go, know where the open space is. And when you're a type of player like that, and then you step into the NHL and you're a rookie, you're a young player, all of those little nuances, it can take a little time to get to an expert level on them. So why does a Cale Makar, who no doubt I'd take Cale Makar in a heartbeat over Owen Power, but why does he flash right away? Because while he's figuring out all those little nuances, he's got the best hands in the world as a defenseman. He's got a huge slap shot. He skates like the wind. He's got all this superstar flash talent that you're going to see. And I think that's where we're at with Power, is we're in the middle of waiting for him to become that Hedman type defenseman. And it's going to be a little frustrating, I think, to kind of go through that process.
This reminds me of the Sharks' 11th overall pick this year, Sam Dickinson, who you watch his OHL game, right? He's bigger, he's stronger, faster than most of the other kids he's playing with. Doesn't, wow you offensively, but you see a lot of the stuff that he does is pro game ready. So, like, I know a lot of Sharks guys like, well, when is he going to get to the NHL? It's like, give him some time. Like, it's going to take a little bit. It's easier for forwards to kind of come in and make an impact. Defensemen, it takes more, because if they screw up, it usually leads to bad things. And goalies take the longest, because if they screw up, it's a goal in the
everyone sees that. Everyone
sees that. So, so something you mentioned kind of earlier with the, you had the immature core, right? And the Sharks, they have a very young core, right? You have Will Smith, who's 19, Macklin Celebrini, who's 18, Fabian Zetterlund is like an old man at 24, William Eklund is going to be 22. But getting guys in the room who can, be leaders, who've kind of been there, and the Sharks went out, they added Alex Wenberg, they added Tyler Toffoli this year. Like,
sure.
How important, again, do you think, going back, if you could redo it, like getting those veteran guys, even like a Barclay Goodrow, who we could discuss his on ice actual impact is, but getting maybe insulating those guys a little bit more, some of those young guys would. So
it's an interesting conversation. I don't think I had as much appreciation when Jack Eichel, Sam Reinhart, and all when they all showed up as like 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I don't think I had at that time as good of an appreciation for the importance of that. I still don't think it's the end-all be-all. But I can understand why Ryan O'Reilly was a little immature at that time, in some ways. And Evander Kane certainly, was
we know Evander Kane.
Right.
Yes.
So when those are the top players you bring in to pair with your super young core, I can understand why that might not be the greatest learning environment, or the greatest environment to develop pro habits, to know what it takes to win. I can understand that. I do think, though, what needs to be said is you gotta have players like that also can carry their weight on the ice. Because to me, the Sabres tried far too often to artificially manufacture that leadership quality, the all that type of stuff, the locker room, I think Eichel once said it after an offseason and an end of season press conference. He kind of got blasted for it. And I remember defending him. And I think the comment, if I'm remembering off the top of my head right, was, we've got some leaders in this room that, again, I'm paraphrasing because it's 7 years ago. I'm not going to remember the quote exactly, but they got leaders in this room that need to carry their weight or need to practice what they're preaching. Yeah. So I do think when you're a young player like that, who's the guy you're playing on the ice with at all times? Who's the guy you're sitting next to on the bench when you're done with your shift that you could go over things with? Because it's one thing to have, they signed Brian Giunta when Eichel was coming up, who was older player, 37. He wasn't the worst player at that point, but he wasn't playing in the top six. Captain of the team, great leader. How often during a game was he talking to Jack Eichel?
Yeah, they're playing two different things, right? Yeah,
they didn't play together. They never played in the same line. They never played together. I'm sure, between games they would go through stuff. But to me, you got to have the guy that could practice what he's preaching, or else the message could be empty. And I do think the Sabres have tried to manufacture that too much. Like when I look at San Jose, I don't know if every guy you just named is an example of that. Like Goodrow, I wouldn't expect to be a guy that plays at the top with Macklin Celebrini. But when you bring in a Tyler Toffoli, that's still a very good player at his age, he's someone that I'd think, okay, top six, playing with the young guys. When he goes to the bench, go through the iPad. This worked, this didn't work. Someone that can lead by example. That's important. You can lead if you're a fourth liner, but you can only lead by example if you're actually making a difference on the ice. And I see a little bit of that with the Sharks. I think the Sabres were trying far too often to just completely artificially bring it in at the bottom of the roster.
Yeah, I mean, the Sharks overhauled their bottom of the roster here and tried to get in some of those character guys. But yeah, it's one thing to be a character guy, a fourth line guy who plays 10 minutes a night. But it's also another thing to be a leader who's actually pulling the weight of the team and helping your young players get better night in, night out. And no,
does that mean they're not going to be trading Logan Couture? By the way, can I stop?
He's dead right now. R.I.P. So we'll see. He's interesting. Right. I'm curious to see with him. He's there. The hope is he'll be ready for training camp. Gotcha. But I'm not holding my breath. And the Alex Wenberg signing, to me, I think that's your Logan Couture insurance. So that's kind of where they were. And I think last year they were expecting to have Hertl, Granlund, Couture, and Nico Sturm playing and they had 0 games with all 4 centers in the same game. So and Luke, that's how you end up with Luke Cunningham on the second line. So all right, before we finish up with Joe and we discuss just some tips and lessons, especially for this first year for the Sharks and kind of what to root for, just need to take a quick break. All right, guys, before we finish up with Joe, of course, I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. For your second listen, go check out one of the other great shows here at the Locked On Network, especially here in the Bay Area, right? You got Locked On Niners, get you all geared up for the new Niners season. You got you covered with training camp. You have Locked On Giants, Locked On A's with the fallout from the trade deadline. And, of course, Locked On Warriors, who got you covered with all things Steph Curry over at the Olympics. So for your second listen, go check out one of the other episodes here at Locked On, where we cover your team every day. Yeah. All right. So you, as a veteran of a long playoff drought and rebuild, I know right now that Sharks fans, there's a lot of buzz. You got Celebrini in the building, you got Will Smith. You feel like this team is not going to win a lot of games, but probably be a little bit more competitive night in, night out, at least a little bit more watchable. What are some lessons that you can, kind of give to us on what to expect over the next couple of seasons, as there are going to be ups and downs, right? You're going to have times where you feel like, okay, this team's turning a corner. And then you're going to have times where this team is just going to be like, what are you guys doing, as you have 18 and 19-year-old kids trying to figure things out?
I think, by the way, my experience is not just in Sabres droughts. I mean, remember, I grew up as a Bills drought guy. So
I'm in the middle of a Dolphins playoff win drought. I was in high school. I was in high school last time they won a playoff game. So I feel you there in that. So
almost. So at least you're getting to the playoffs once every 5 years. I didn't even see a playoff game that I could remember until I was like 19 years old.
And then when they do get to the
20 years old.
playoffs, you play with your backup QB for, multiple seasons in a
Matt,
row.
Matt Moore. I remember that one.
Skylar Thompson, baby, almost pulled it off. Anyway,
I almost lost my mind that day. Anyways, I think the best lesson for how to take in a team like this, especially in year one, is focus more on the individual developments. Focus more on how does a Macklin Celebrini develop over the period of the year. What are things that he gets better at? Enjoy the highlight reel plays, the individual growth that you're going to get from a lot of the young pieces. To me, that is the best way to take in year one and just not really worry about, are they going to make the playoffs? Because even if they do, even if you get super lucky and you have a great goaltending season and you shock the world and you squeak in as a 7 or an 8
in the first round by Colorado or somebody like that. Yes.
Right. Like, you're not going to win the cup. Like, what's the end all be all here? It's to win the cup. And if you're not going to win the cup that year and you've got a young developing team, then take pleasure in kind of the individual growth, especially the young players as they go along. Beyond that, like, I don't have any problem flipping expectations right away after that. Like, to me, you don't have to wait. This is a league where what drives me even more crazy about the Sabres is, in the last 3 years, I've been very critical of them for how patient they've been, because it was like this offseason, even this offseason. Now they're just having a tougher time because they can't get players to want to come here. But this was the first offseason where they're finally like, all right, it's time to go for it. And I'm sitting here like, time to go for it. This young core that you've had this growth with, you started this 4 years ago. Like, what do you mean time to start going, putting your chips to the middle? You could have been doing that 2 years ago when you missed the playoffs by 1 point. To me, like, it doesn't ever have to be too early to push your chips in a little bit. If Celebrini is 20 years old and they're starting to show some signs around him of a capability of winning, and you might think, well, do I want to trade my first round pick here? Do I want to trade, this prospect or this young player? Like, to me, go win. Go start gaining that learning experience of playing in the playoffs, which I think is also beneficial for a lot of these young players. To me, I have no problem flipping expectations the moment year 2, and maybe if you want to do one more year 3 especially. But not everything in the NHL has to be this long 5-year rebuild. How many teams have proven you can go from worst to first in a flash? Like, the Sabres are an anomaly. That what they've done doesn't happen. Again, no team has ever gone this long missing the playoffs. This has never happened before in hockey. The sport is designed around its parity and how quickly you can flip it. I think there's never a greater example of that to me than what the Colorado Avalanche did 6-7 years ago. Like, that was as extreme as it gets. That team had 48 points. In a full 82-game season, 48 points. One of the worst teams in hockey history. The next season, they were in the playoffs. Like, it can flip on a dime like that. So enjoy the young players, enjoy the individual stuff in year 1. And then, to me, I've got no problem with the Sharks fans saying, all right, let's go win in year 2.
Makes sense. And especially because I think what Mike Grier has done kind of setting up here, right, is cleaning the cap, right? Getting rid of big contracts like Erik Karlsson, Brent Burns, Tomas Hertl. And yes, they have some dead cap space on there, but like that's going to start cleaning up here soon, especially when you have to start paying these young players in the future. Like he's done a good job of lining up when the cap cleans up and when I got to start paying what you expect Celebrini and Smith and Eklund to make in the future years. So, and the Sharks entered this offseason with a ton of cap space in them. I thought they spent it wisely, but they weren't crazy about it. Again, trying to add players around who can, be useful players on the ice and provide some leadership. But yeah, I expect if the Sharks play well and you see Celebrini play well and you see Will Smith play well and you see Eklund kind of take that next step, go find some defensemen who can help move the puck out of the zone, because you don't want to be that version of the Sabres. We have a bunch of awesome forwards, but you don't have a defenseman who can get the puck from point A to point B, and then you're stuck watching Mario Ferraro have to struggle to get the puck out of the zone for 25 minutes a night.
I would add too that like the way the league is trending, like you mentioned all the cap space, don't be surprised if Celebrini's a great player, Will Smith's a great player, like the way guys are getting paid right now, like it just happens right away. Jack Hughes got paid. He's going into year 3 of his extension. He got paid at 20 years old. Like it took one big year. The Sabres have done this too. Like, I mean, they did it with Thompson and Cousins and a couple of their other guys. Like one great year, let's lock you in right now because otherwise you're going to cost me $9 million.
You're just going to cost me more in the long. Yeah, and it's especially when they're 21, 22, and you're signing those 8 years deals. Like, there is a small chance of them just the downside. But I just think in today's
when you're number one pick, though, it's usually pretty small. You show one big year and you're a number 1 overall pick. Like there's not many examples of that guy really flaming out from that point.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah, if it's like guys like Ekblad, who was 7th overall, a guy like Smith, who was 4th overall, and Celebrini, like we've already seen it from Eklund, and I expect Eklund to have a bigger year next year. But yeah, just lock in your core guys because they're going to just cost you more in the long run. And then you play that stupid the bridge deal game that I think burnt Doug Wilson so many times, and then it's the worst thing. So lock them in long term and be done with it. So Joe, thank you so much. Hopefully, Sharks fans, we learned some lessons. Enjoy this season.
I hope for your sake that it's not going to be what year would this be for the Sharks missing the playoffs? Like 4 or 5?
This is going to be year 6 because last time they 2019 was the last time they were in the playoffs when they went to the Western Conference Finals. Then they had screwed around for 2 to 3 years before Mike Grier got in here and really set a plan in place. So
love Mike Grier, by the way. He is a part of my favorite Sabre team of all time, the 06 Sabres. I still to this day say would have won the Stanley Cup if 5 of their defensemen did not get injured in the conference finals. So I love Mike Grier. I hope for your sake and Sharks fans' sakes that I'm not sitting here in 9 years still talking about them not making the playoffs with you, because I would not wish this amount of time missing upon my worst enemy.
There's nothing better than playoff hockey, buddy. You guys deserve it. So hopefully sooner rather than later. Joe, where can the people find you, buddy?
At Sneaky Joe Sports on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. I still call it Twitter. Locked on Sabres, wherever you're listening to this podcast, any podcast feed or on YouTube. Be sure to check me out there.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, JD.
All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Joe. I thought it was a good look at, rebuilds are fun until they aren't fun. And I think for Sharks fans, kind of a nice little, just keep this stuff in the back of your mind, and especially with the team building and how Mike Grier is kind of doing this. And I'm really curious to see, one thing that really stuck out to me was it's never too early to kind of start being aggressive. And especially if you see signs in Celebrini and you see signs in Will Smith and you see signs in Eklund, to start adding those pieces around them, because those guys are only going to get better, right? That's the expectation, right? Is those guys are only going to get better. With Mike Grier having a ton of cap space expected next offseason, what does he do to really try to accelerate this growth, and that you're not stuck being either the next Ducks, which have taken forever to get anything done, or you don't want to. The worst case scenario is your next Sabres, where you go through multiple cores and you're not able to put this thing together. So that's just something I'm gonna kind of keep in the back of my head, I think, this season, and this especially going into next off season. So that's gonna be it for me today. We'll be back tomorrow, of course. And then next week, we're down to 3 episodes a week. So make sure you guys are following wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well. Follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Follow me on Twitter at MyFryhole. Till tomorrow. Bye, friends.